Welcome to everybody joining us today at the Ukraine Media Center and Ukraine Forum on the day of 233rd day of our heroic resistance. Today we talk about a historic decision by the PACE of Russia as a terrorist state. We have been joined by Maria Mezentseva, the member of the Ukrainian Parliament and the head of the permanent delegation of the Ukrainian Parliament to the Parliamentary Assembly. Welcome everybody and congratulations on today's holiday. Thank you. We are aware that this is not only the sole decision passed by the PACE. Let us talk about the consequences of such decision for Russia in the first place and for the impact on our country. Thank you for this opportunity. This is a very important event. Honestly, I see the response from the Russian quarters, and you mentioned that, and you're doing that very good, that Russia and its leadership that have to do with these crimes and the whole terrorist regime. This was an amendment that was suggested to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. The issue was debated about the wording per se, and we believe that the reduction that we ended up at the end of the day and was approved and was voted on is a very good one, and we are thankful for the President Zelensky to stress that particular point in his remarks before the voting took place. I would also like to note that Russia is very anxiously following the issue of the structure of the United Nations, and it is important to know that Russia is illegitimately a member of the United Nations, and in particular the member of the Security Council, having the vetoed empowerment, as well as other members of the Security Council. We believe that such a granting of the state designating as a terrorist state is a roadmap for such organizations and the United Nations to respond to these two decisions in the PACE resolution. Of course, we follow the events in the Parliamentary Assembly, the hysteria that has followed it, the status of the terrorist state and terrorist regime, and call to exclude the country from the UN structures. You know, there is one institution where Russia was expelled from, the Committee on the Human Rights. We see in different media outlets the response of Russia to the so-called grain agreement. The resolution is calling the partner countries to get united behind such an agreement to be working and effective. Of course, we are mindful of the energy situation, meaning the insecurity situation and the threats to use nuclear force, the situation at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant that has also been mentioned in the resolution. We have seen the response of the International Atomic Agency. We are also keen to see the active response to this decision by the International Red Cross to set up special missions to visit the Zaporizhia power plant and on the issue of freeing our prisoners of war, people that have been in the Russian captivity. Their relatives are trying to identify where their beloved ones are. And the Red Cross also is mindful of that. We have been talking to the relatives of the Ukrainian POWs. The PACE delegations often visit different places in Chernihiv, Sumy, Mykolaiv, Kherson regions in Ukraine. So it's not about the visits to Kyiv region or the occupied territories. What we want to achieve is that this is an effective mechanism for the future. All the members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the European Council have been talking about that, not only the Ukrainian delegation, but all the European countries mentioned that Putin represents the terrorist regime, and it has been mentioned in the resolution. In such a way, we must set up an ad hoc tribunal for President Putin and for his immediate circle and henchmen that have been abetting this war of aggression. We seem to be experiencing some technical issues here. It has to do not only with Ukraine solely, it has to do with Moldova, Georgia, the Syrian situation. It's about Europe and beyond. Can you hear me? We should check the connection. Given this, it's very important that this has been sponsored not by the Ukrainian delegation, but our partners have come up with the call to set up an ad hoc tribunal, work on that path, and countries will be working along the bilateral lines, and there will be founding countries of this ad hoc tribunal. A very positive component is that we have a very specific call for cooperation and a work group set up by the President Zelensky is working on that over the last 6 months, I believe. We expect very specific results to take place in December or January next year. As the parliamentarians, we will be advocating the setting up of such an ad hoc tribunal, not only by the 45 member states, but by whole international community. There are countries that are not members of the Council of Europe, but they can support us anyway. We have been conducting negotiations even with Australia to make sure that they get involved in the issue of renewal of justice through the legal instruments. This is where the historic role of Ukraine cannot be overestimated. We are setting up the mechanisms that will be mentioned in the books on humanitarian international law in the future. We may be proud of that. And as far as we are concerned, including the Office of the General Prosecutor of Ukraine, we will be looking into the ways of how to punish the war criminals, dividing between the war of aggression and the war crimes. Of course, the regional representatives of the General Prosecutor's Office are working on that. And our friends in the European countries are also keeping track. Such crimes as torture, mass shootings, it has been mentioned unequivocally and openly by our European partners after their visits to Ukraine. They don't keep the position or we don't know anything about it. We have also heard the issue of the right to education. Mr. Delegation from Iceland mentioned his visit to Kharkiv. He delivered the electronic devices for the Ukrainian children. To make sure that the Ukrainian children have the right to life, we need to receive more equipment, and this has been amended on the resolution to provide Ukraine the means of the air defense. Back in March, it was not possible at all to mention such a point in the resolution in April or in June, but what we have seen yesterday testifies to the fact that we have the backing up. Behind the scenes, we've been talking to our colleagues, and we began our talk with this particular issue, air defense system, followed by the human rights issue. These are interconnected issues. Of course, we were all glad about the resolution passed by the United Nations not recognizing the sham referenda. In the English language, we use the word referendums to make sure that this does not mean legal referendums. Of course, we know that these sham referenda were conducted when people were confronted with the armed military, and of course people were forced to participate, including the teachers and the workers of the local communal services. We are glad that this resolution has been supported in spite of the one vote against. We will be talking to those who voted against to know what their position really is. But this is the most happiest time of my life, I will be frank with you. The Ukrainian delegation keeps working, and we begin our day by thinking about what we can do for this country. We seem to have lost connection. We can't hear you. And I would like to underline the great impact of the cultural diplomacy, because it was very well seen through the cooperation with the Kharkiv Opera House and the British artists who painted the painting in support of Ukraine. And this picture was opened up again, the backdrop of music performed by the Kharkiv Opera Orchestra. What we have seen is that the enemy does not only destroy our kindergartens, children's playgrounds, and universities. What they're trying to do is to raze to the ground our culture and history. The enemy will not succeed, and such events that were conducted in the main hall of the Council of Europe is testimony to that. We are thankful to our partners, including Mr. Michael, who has initiated such an event. Cultural diplomacy is working. Actual diplomacy is effective. Ukrainian armed forces are effective. They're defending our country, and we are defending this country on different diplomatic platforms. Without you guys, men and women in uniform, this cannot be done. You are bringing the victory closer. As for the resolution on the setting up of the International Ad Hoc Tribunal, could you enlighten us whether this is a decision of a more declarative nature or a binding decision to set up such an international tribunal. We have been working on this for 6 months now to secure the backing up of our colleagues. The international tribunal is likely to be to have a seat in The Hague, not in Kyiv as we wanted it to be in the first place. But about 80% of our international colleagues are in favor of this. Of course, this institution will include Ukrainian party. Of course, Russia will not be part of that project because this is absurd. And as I said, there have been a number of developments here. Together with the founding members of the Council of Europe, we'll be working with other countries on bilateral basis, or we can use the platform of the Council of Europe with 45 membership, or the United Nations, which will be more complex. The format will be decided on later on, but we have a working information now. It has to be amended, filled in. We will take on board the recommendations from our international partners, and I think that in January we will see the final wording of this document. Perhaps this is the first weighty decision to recognize the ruling regime of Putin as a terrorist regime. Do you expect this to be providing a fresh impetus for other international organizations? I will be brief. Indeed, at the national level, Estonia, for example, has joined us, and we have taken our proposition from the example of Estonia, and we will be able to have these decisions passed in national parliaments. You know that Russia is conducting a terrorist policy, and countries are not cooperating with the terrorist state. That country has been in isolation, and of course, within the framework of international organizations, Russia cannot be member of the Security Council of the UN, vetoing the issues of security sponsored by United Nations or the United Kingdom. I am glad that the organization called to secure and defend the human rights, the Council of Europe and its Parliamentary Assembly has passed such a decision. The war has been part and parcel of our daily routine, and it is good that other countries seem to have understood the gravity of the situation and are working through diplomatic channel. We would like to thank all the Ukrainian delegation working on ensuring the passage of such a decision. You see, our members have been doing fantastic work. Ms. Konstantevich and others have been working very powerfully. Let me remind you that since 2019, Ukrainian delegation has been most powerful one. And of course, I thank you for recognizing the contribution of every member of our delegation. And it's very good and pleasant. We thank you for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you that we've been talking to Maria Mezentseva, Ukrainian Parliament's member and the head of the permanent delegation of Ukraine to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Next event will be hosted by Ivan Fedorov at 2:40. He is the mayor of Melitopol, who will be discussing about the developments in his city. Stay tuned.